It was a Tuesday in February, and the temperature in Winnipeg had dropped to -23. Not the kind of cold that makes you pull your collar up. The kind that makes your lungs ache just walking from the parking lot to the front door. The kind that kills people who aren't paying attention. Nobody was paying attention that morning. The Portage Avenue bus shelter was packed. 8, maybe 9 people standing close together, breath rising in little clouds, eyes down on phones, ears buried under headphones. The 7:42 was late, which meant everyone had been standing there longer than they wanted to be. Nobody was looking at anyone else. That's just how it goes in the city. You learn not to look. Except one of them wasn't standing anymore. Clifford Angus MacDonald, 67 years old, had been sitting on the metal bench inside that shelter since 6:50 in the morning. He'd been waiting for a ride that wasn't coming. His daughter had forgotten, again, and his phone had died somewhere around 7:15. He was wearing a wool coat that had been good once, maybe 15 years ago, and boots that let in the cold through a crack in the left sole he'd been meaning to fix since October. By 7:40, Clifford had stopped shivering. That's the part nobody tells you. When hypothermia sets in, the shivering stops. The body gives up trying to warm itself. From the outside, a person can look almost calm, almost fine, like they're just resting. 7 people stood in that shelter and thought Clifford was just resting. The 8th person was Yvonne Tran-Beausoleil, 61 years old. A woman who worked the early shift at the dry cleaning shop on Notre Dame 3 days a week and spent the other 4 days looking after her mother, who had dementia, in a 1-bedroom apartment 12 minutes away by bus. Yvonne had her own problems. Anyone who knew her could tell you that. She hadn't slept more than 5 hours in 3 days. Her back had been bad since November. She had $42 in her account until Friday. And she was the only person in that shelter who looked up. She noticed the color first. The gray-white at Clifford's lips. Then the stillness. Then the way his hands had slipped off his lap and were hanging at his sides, fingers slightly open, like he'd simply let go of something. "Sir," she said. Nobody else moved. "Sir, are you all right?" Nothing. Yvonne pushed through the 2 people between her and the bench. She put her hand on Clifford's shoulder and felt the cold in his coat even through her gloves. She said his name. Well, she didn't know his name yet. She said "sir" again, louder this time, and when his head lolled slightly to the side, she stopped thinking about the bus and started thinking about what to do. She called 911. She took off her scarf, the long one, dark green wool, the one her mother had given her years ago when her mother still remembered giving things, and she wrapped it around Clifford's neck and shoulders. She asked the man standing nearest to her, a young guy in a red Canada Goose jacket, if he could help hold Clifford upright until the ambulance came. He looked at her. He looked at his phone. He stepped back slightly and looked at the street. Yvonne held Clifford upright by herself. The bus came and went. 6 of the 8 people got on it. The young man in the red jacket waited another 2 minutes, shifted his weight, and then got into a rideshare that pulled up to the curb. He didn't say anything as he left. He just left. And so it was Yvonne, alone, in a bus shelter on Portage Avenue at 7:49 in the morning, holding a stranger upright in -23-degree weather, talking to him softly. She didn't even know why. He couldn't hear her, but she talked anyway. Saying things like, "You're going to be okay, and help is coming, and I've got you." She was 40 minutes late for work that day. Her supervisor, a young woman named Tiffany, who had never been late once in her life, gave her a written warning. Yvonne took the paper, folded it, put it in her coat pocket, and didn't explain. What would she have said? The paramedics said another 20 minutes, and it might have been a different story. Clifford Angus MacDonald spent 2 nights in the hospital. Mild hypothermia, some confusion, a bruise on his hip from where he'd slid slightly on the bench. The nurses were kind. The food was not. He was discharged on Thursday morning with a pamphlet about cold weather safety and a phone number for a seniors outreach program he already knew about and had never called because he didn't think of himself as the kind of person who needed outreach. He was wrong about that, but most people are wrong about that. His daughter, her name was Robin, and she felt terrible, genuinely terrible. She'd just gotten the days mixed up. She'd had the kids. The younger one had an ear infection. She picked him up from the hospital and drove him home and made him soup and cried a little on his couch. Clifford patted her hand and told her it was fine. That was the kind of man he was. The kind who tells people it's fine when it isn't, because he doesn't want to be the reason someone else feels bad. He asked the nurse before he left if they had any information about who had called the ambulance. The nurse checked. The record said the call had come from a woman named Yvonne, no last name in the file. He asked if there was any way to contact her. There wasn't. Privacy, the nurse said, and shrugged apologetically. Clifford went home. He thought about the green scarf around his neck when he woke up in the hospital. He thought about the voice that had said, "I've got you." He didn't know who it belonged to. He didn't know how to find out. He thought about it every day for a week. Then things happened. Robin came by more often. The outreach program called. Someone had referred him, he didn't know who, and he finally answered. He started going to a drop-in lunch on Wednesdays at a community center on Alexander, where a woman named Bet always saved him a seat, and a man named Roderick always complained about the coffee. Small things, ordinary things, the kind that keep you going. But he didn't forget the voice, and he didn't forget the scarf. 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday, Clifford was eating a bowl of beef barley soup at the community center when a volunteer coordinator named Gemma asked if anyone wanted to help distribute winter gear at the bus depot on Thursday morning. They needed people who knew the area, people who wouldn't mind the cold. Clifford said yes before she finished asking. He showed up Thursday at 6:30. There were 4 volunteers, including him. They had a folding table, crates of donated gloves and toques and hand warmers, and a big thermos of coffee. Clifford stood at the edge of the table and handed things to people coming through, and he felt, for the first time in a long time, like he was on the right side of the equation. Around 8 in the morning, a woman in a long gray coat came through. She was moving quickly, head down, the way you move when you're running late and you know it. She almost passed the table entirely. Then she stopped. She looked at the gloves. She looked at the hand warmers. She looked at Clifford. He looked at her. He didn't know why he looked twice. Something in the set of her shoulders. Something familiar he couldn't name. "You want some gloves?" he said. "Oh, no, I'm fine," she said, the way people do when they mean the opposite. Her hands were in her pockets, and he could see they were red from the cold. "Take the gloves?" he said. She laughed a little. She took the gloves, and then she saw the scarf around his neck, dark green wool, slightly frayed at one end, and she went very still. Clifford noticed her looking. He touched the scarf. "Someone gave me this," he said. "I'm still trying to find them to return it." Yvonne Tranbosolil looked at this old man in a winter volunteer vest and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. "You don't need to return it," she said quietly. "I didn't give it to you. I just lent it to the situation." He stared at her. She shrugged. "It was my mother's." And that was how Clifford found her. Not because he went looking in the right places, but because the right places have a way of being small. And Winnipeg in February is the kind of city where people who need each other keep ending up at the same folding table. He bought her a coffee from the thermos. She had 15 minutes before she had to get to work. They stood at the side of the table, and he told her what the paramedics had said. About the 20 minutes, about the other story that almost happened. And she listened with her hands wrapped around the paper cup, and her eyes somewhere else. The way you look when you're absorbing something you didn't quite believe until now. "I just called 911, she said. "That's all I did." "You stayed," he said. She didn't answer that. Clifford asked about the scarf. He'd noticed the initials embroidered in the corner, faded but there, MT, and it had bothered him. He asked what they stood for. "My mother," Yvonne said. "Marguerite. She made it herself. A long time ago when she still could. She said it the way you say things that carry a lot of weight, but you've said them so many times they come out even." Clifford was quiet for a moment. Then he unwrapped the scarf slowly from around his neck and held it out to her. "I can't keep this," he said. "I told you to keep it. It belongs to your family." She looked at it for a long time, then she reached out and took it. She folded it carefully, the way you fold something that matters, and put it in her bag. "My mother doesn't remember she made it anymore," she said. "But I do." They stood there for another minute. The cold was sharp and the morning was loud around them. Buses, horns, the scrape of boots on salted concrete, and neither of them said anything, which was fine. Some conversations don't need to be finished out loud. Before she left, Yvonne asked if he came to this bus depot often. He said he thought he might start. What neither of them knew, at that folding table on a Thursday morning, was that Clifford Angus MacDonald was not a man of ordinary consequence. This isn't something he advertised, or even thought about very often anymore. He had retired 12 years earlier from a company he'd spent 31 years building. Commercial refrigeration units. Not glamorous, not interesting to anyone at parties, but necessary and profitable. And eventually sold to an American logistics firm for a number that surprised even Clifford. He lived alone in a small house in Transcona. He drove a 10-year-old Civic. He wore the same wool coat he'd worn for 15 years and had boots that let in the cold through a crack he'd been meaning to fix since October. His daughter Robin was the only one who knew everything. His accountant, his lawyer, a man named Peterson who played hockey with Clifford's brother on Thursday nights. And that was about it. The morning after the folding table, Clifford called Peterson. He explained what he wanted to do. Peterson was quiet for a moment, and then said, "You sure about the amount?" Clifford said yes. Peterson said he'd need a few days to set it up properly. Clifford said fine. He didn't call Yvonne. He didn't know her last name yet. He only knew she worked at a dry cleaning shop on Notre Dame and cared for her mother and had given her scarf to a stranger in a bus shelter, because that was, apparently, just the kind of woman she was. He asked Gemma, the volunteer coordinator, if she could help him find her. Gemma, who had been coordinating volunteers in Winnipeg long enough to know when something was genuine and when it wasn't, looked at him for a long moment and then said she might be able to make a call. It was a Friday morning, 2 weeks later, when a man in a dark coat knocked on the door of the small apartment above the laundromat on Selkirk Avenue. Yvonne answered the door with a dish towel over her shoulder because she'd been washing her mother's breakfast things. She was not expecting anyone. She looked at the man, tall 60s, good coat, serious expression, and assumed he had the wrong address. "Miss Tranbosoli," he said. She straightened. "Yes? My name is Peterson. I'm a lawyer. I represent a client named Clifford MacDonald." He paused. "I believe you may know him." Yvonne took the dish towel off her shoulder and held it in both hands, the way you hold something when you need to do something with your hands. "The man from the bus shelter," she said. "Yes." Peterson opened the leather folder he was carrying. "He asked me to deliver this to you directly and to explain what it means, if you have a few minutes." She looked at the folder. She looked at the hallway behind her, where she could hear the television her mother watched every morning, the same news program on repeat, because repetition was one of the few things that still felt safe. "Come in," she said. She read it 3 times. Then she put it down on the kitchen table and looked at Peterson, who was sitting across from her with the particular expression lawyers wear when they have learned not to react to what they carry. "This isn't," she started. "It is," he said. "He can't. He can. He has." The document was a gift. Straightforward, legally structured, irrevocable. Enough to pay off the medical debt Yvonne had been carrying since her mother's diagnosis 3 years ago. Enough to cover a proper care facility if she ever decided she couldn't manage alone anymore. A separate, smaller amount, set aside specifically, earmarked in the paperwork with a note in Clifford's own handwriting. "For you. Not for anything. Just for you." Yvonne sat at her kitchen table for a long time without speaking. Peterson waited. He was good at waiting. From the other room, her mother's television murmured. The news anchor's voice, steady and even. And underneath it, faintly, the sound of her mother humming. Something old, something without words. a melody that had no name Yvonne knew, but that she had heard her whole life. He didn't have to do this, Yvonne finally said. No, Peterson agreed. He didn't. I just called 911. Peterson looked at her. He said you'd say that. He reached into the folder again and produced a single folded piece of paper. Just a note, handwritten on plain paper. He passed it across the table and Yvonne took it. She read it once. That was enough. It said, "You stayed." Most people don't understand what that costs. I do now. I'm grateful to have the means to say so properly, and I'm glad I found you. Clifford, she folded it back along the same creases, and set it down next to the legal document, and looked at the two pieces of paper side by side for a moment. The official one, full of language and clauses, and the plain one, full of nothing except what it needed to say. Then she got up, because her mother needed her lunch, and because that's what you do. You get up. You keep going. Even when something unexpected and enormous has just landed on your kitchen table on a Friday morning in February. I've thought about that bus shelter many times since I first heard this story. About those 7 people who didn't look up. I don't think most of them were bad. I think they were tired, and cold, and running late, and doing what the rest of us do most days. Moving through the world with our eyes on the next task, the next place we have to be. I think that's human, and I think it's also something we could all do a little better. Yvonne looked up. That's the whole of it. She looked up, and because she did, Clifford went home. Here's what I keep coming back to. Yvonne wasn't in a position to save anyone that morning. She was exhausted. She was broke. She was late. She had her own weight, and she'd been carrying it for a long time. There was nothing convenient about what she did. There was no reward she was angling for. No audience she was performing for. There was only a stranger on a bench, and a small, clear sense that something was wrong, and she was the only one who'd noticed. That instinct, that refusal to look away, is not a small thing. Don't let anyone tell you it is. And Clifford, this quiet man in a cracked boot who'd been moving through the world like he barely took up space, who said it's fine when it wasn't, who didn't think of himself as the kind of person who needed help or who could give it. He found a way to say thank you that changed a life. Not because the money was magic, because it was seen. Because being seen, really seen, after a long time of going unnoticed, is its own kind of restoration. They still meet on Thursdays. Clifford volunteers at the bus depot. Yvonne's mother has a space at a care facility now. A good one, 12 minutes away, where the staff know her name and the activities coordinator plays old radio programs on Friday afternoons. Yvonne still works at the dry cleaning shop 3 mornings a week, because she likes it there. And it turns out you don't have to stop doing the things you like just because your circumstances change. The dark green scarf hangs on a hook by Yvonne's front door. Her mother doesn't remember making it, but sometimes, when Yvonne is helping her with her coat, Marguerite reaches out and touches it with one finger. The way you touch something your hands remember even when your mind doesn't, and smiles at it without knowing why. That's what staying looks like, I think. Not the dramatic kind, the ordinary kind that happens in bus shelters and at kitchen tables and on the other side of doors that almost didn't get answered. It looks like a woman with $42 in her account taking off her scarf in the cold, and it lasts longer than either of them expected.